In the summer of 2017, a wildfire management crew working inside Sequoia National Park noticed something on the eastern slope of a granite ridge near the heart of the giant forest that nobody on the team could immediately explain. The fire had burned low through a section of undergrowth that hadn't been cleared in decades, and where the brush had gone, a vertical crack in the granite had been exposed, roughly 4 feet high and less than 2 feet wide, sealed from the inside with a tight packing of dry clay and small stones that showed the unmistakable marks of human hands. The crew foreman, a man with 20 years of field experience, said later that he knew immediately it hadn't been placed there by any park maintenance operation he was aware of, because it was far too old, and because the clay had been pressed into the crack from the interior, not the exterior. He called it in. A ranger came out. The ranger called a supervisor. And 3 weeks later, when archaeologists from the University of California had carefully removed enough of that packing to see what was inside, they found a chamber carved partially into the living granite and partially into a natural fissure, roughly 15 feet deep and 8 feet across at its widest point, that had been sealed so effectively that the air inside still smelled of pine resin and something else the lead archaeologist later described simply as old. Inside that chamber were 20 objects, 20 relics arranged on ledges and laid carefully on the flat stone floor, as if someone had organized a collection they intended to return to. None of the objects belonged to the species of artifact the Park Service had ever documented in this part of California. Several of them had no business being in California at all. And number one, the thing at the back of the chamber in the deepest shadows, is the reason this cave has been very quietly studied for 7 years without a single press release. Subscribe right now and stay with me through every one of these 20 relics, because the further we go into that cave, the stranger the story gets. Number 20 was the object nearest the entrance, and in a strange way, the most grounding, because it was the one thing the team expected to find in this landscape. It was a basket, or what remained of one, woven from materials identified as split willow shoots and beargrass, the traditional raw materials of the Yokuts and Western Mono peoples who have lived in and around the Sierra Nevada for thousands of years. The weave pattern was a 3-strand diagonal twining that specialists recognized immediately as consistent with the Central Valley, California tradition and the basket's dimensions, about 14 inches in diameter and 7 inches deep, suggested it was a carrying and storage form rather than a ceremonial shape. But here is what made it strange. The basket had been placed inside a fitted ring of small river stones that had been arranged with deliberate precision, each stone touching the next, encircling the basket without quite touching it. The river stones themselves are not local to this granite ridge. The nearest source of river-smooth stones of this size and type is the middle fork of the Kauai River, about 4 miles to the west. Someone carried those stones up a granite slope, placed them in a ring that fit the basket so precisely it seems measured, and then sealed the cave. The basket is beautiful and the stones are careful. But what was in the basket when it was sealed is what matters most. The conservators found only dust inside it and the faint chemical signature of something organic that has since completely decomposed. Whatever it held, it was gone. The stones remain. Number 19 was a point, a projectile point, but not one that fits neatly into any California tradition. It measured just over 4 inches long, pressure flaked from a translucent amber-colored chert, and the specific shade and translucency of that material led the lithic specialist on the team to a source she described as deeply surprising. The chert matches, by visual analysis and preliminary geochemical comparison, a formation found in Central Oregon, more than 600 miles to the north. California has abundant flint and chert sources, and pre-Columbian peoples in this region were skilled knappers who produced excellent points from local stone. They didn't need to import it, which means either this point traveled 600 miles through trade, or the person who made it had been 600 miles away and brought their material with them when they came south. The point shows no edge damage consistent with use in hunting. It is pristine. It was placed here, not lost here. Number 18 was a bundle of feathers, wrapped at the base with a fine cord of twisted plant fiber, that had survived in remarkable condition due to the cave's dry, stable atmosphere. The feathers were large primary flight feathers, and the ornithologist consulted by the team identified them without hesitation as California condor, Gymnogyps californianus, a species that has been sacred to indigenous peoples of California and the Southwest for thousands of years. Condor feathers appear in ceremonial contexts across an enormous geographic range, from the Channel Islands to the Colorado Plateau, and their presence here is not surprising in itself. What is surprising is the cord. The twisted fiber wrapping at the base of the bundle was analyzed and identified as milkweed cordage, which is consistent with California indigenous traditions. But the twist direction and the specific two-ply structure of the cord matched most closely to examples from the Chumash tradition of the Central Coast, rather than the mountain and valley traditions of the Sierra Nevada interior. Someone from the coast, or someone who learned coastal techniques, had a hand in what was placed in this cave. Number 17 was a ceramic vessel. And ceramics are where the California story starts to fracture, because the peoples of the Sierra Nevada and the Central Valley were not, in the archaeological record as it is currently understood, ceramic-producing cultures. The peoples of this region were basket makers of extraordinary sophistication. They did not fire clay. So the presence of a ceramic vessel, about 6 inches tall, with a rounded base and a slightly constricted neck, is already an anomaly before you examine what it's made of. The clay body is tempered with crushed shell, a technique associated with coastal and island groups in California, and with cultures along the Colorado River corridor. The surface is polished to a low burnish and decorated with a red slip that has been incised after firing to reveal the buff clay beneath in a zigzag and interlocking diamond pattern. That decorative syntax, the combination of red slip and post-fire incision in geometric forms, is strongly associated with the Patayan tradition of the lower Colorado River region, a ceramic-producing culture whose territory extended into what is now Arizona. This vessel came from far away, or was made by someone who came from far away. Either way, it had no ordinary reason to be on a granite ridge inside a sealed cave in Sequoia National Park. Number 16 was a stone that the team initially cataloged simply as a grinding slab, because it is flat, roughly oval, about 18 inches across, and its surface shows the characteristic wear pattern of extended use for grinding. But when the lithic specialist examined it more closely, she found something that a grinding slab doesn't usually have. On its underside, the side that had been resting against the cave floor, there were incised lines, shallow and deliberate, forming a pattern that she spent 2 days trying to categorize before concluding that it didn't fit any recognized California rock art tradition. The pattern is a series of nested concentric arcs, like a fingerprint or the rings of a tree, but not quite either, with 3 short lines radiating outward from the center at roughly equal intervals. Identical or near-identical designs have been documented at rock art sites in the Great Basin, the Mojave Desert, and at several sites in the Colorado Plateau region of the Four Corners area. The grinding slab was both a tool and a canvas, and the image on its hidden face connected it to a world that extended far beyond the Sierra. Number 15 was a length of cordage that stopped the textile specialist cold. It was about 3 feet long, coiled carefully, and placed on a low stone ledge, and it appeared intact. Under magnification, it resolved into a 4-strand braid of extraordinary evenness and regularity. The fiber was not immediately identifiable in the field, and when samples were sent to a laboratory, the analysis came back with a result that generated 3 weeks of follow-up checking. The fiber is cotton, Gossypium hirsutum, cultivated cotton, not wild. Cotton was not grown by the peoples of the Sierra Nevada. Cotton cultivation in pre-Columbian California was limited to specific groups along the lower Colorado River who obtained seed from southwestern agricultural peoples. This piece of cotton cordage, braided with a technique the textile specialist described as consistent with examples from the ancestral Puebloan tradition, arrived on a granite ridge at more than 6,000 feet elevation from a minimum of several hundred miles away. It was stored with care. It was not waste or refuse. It was considered worth keeping. Number 14 was a shell ornament, a large disc bead about 2.5 inches in diameter, drilled through the center and polished on both faces to a smooth luster. The shell was identified as Olivella biplicata, purple olive shell, which is found along the California coast from Baja to Vancouver Island, and has been used as currency and ornament by California indigenous peoples for at least 8,000 years. An olivella disc bead in a Sierra Nevada cave is not unusual. What was unusual was the secondary modification on this one. Around the drilled hole, on one face, a series of fine concentric lines had been incised with something sharp, and between two of those lines, a row of tiny punctate dots had been pressed into the shell. This style of secondary decoration on olivella beads is documented in the literature for one culture specifically, the Chumash of the Santa Barbara Channel region, who produced the most elaborate shell bead and ornament tradition in North America. A Chumash-style ornament in the Sierra Nevada interior is a long way from the coast. It is also exactly the kind of object that moved through the documented trade networks of pre-Columbian California, the trails that connected the coast to the mountains and the mountains to the desert. This disc bead was currency. It was also a message about where it came from. If you've been watching this channel for any length of time, you know that when objects like this show up far from home, they don't end up in sealed caves by accident. Leave a comment right now and tell me what you think was going on in that cave. I read all of them. Number 13 was a bundle of herbs, and the ethnobotanist who examined it said quietly, after her first look, that she had not expected to see some of what was in it. The bundle was wrapped in a piece of tulle reed and tied with twisted grass cord, and inside it were 5 distinct plant materials in dried form, all identifiable. 2 of them were completely expected in this landscape: white sage and yerba santa, both native to California and both documented in the ceremonial and medicinal traditions of Sierra Nevada and Central Valley peoples. 2 more were from elsewhere but not impossibly far: black sage from the coastal sage scrub habitat of Southern California and Mormon tea from the desert margins. But the 5th was different. The 5th was a small quantity of dried plant material identified as tobacco, Nicotiana attenuata, a species whose natural range is the Great Basin and the Colorado Plateau, not California. Indigenous California peoples did use tobacco in ceremony, but their sources were almost entirely traded, which means this bundle contains an object that traveled at minimum 200 miles to be here, wrapped in with things that grew within a day's walk of this cave. Whoever assembled this bundle knew exactly what they were combining and why. Number 12 was the first object in the cave that the archaeologists described as immediately, visually startling. It was a mask carved from a single piece of wood, roughly 9 inches tall and 7 inches wide, shaped to fit a human face, with cutout eyes and a shallow curved recess for the nose. The wood has been identified as cottonwood root, a material used in kachina figure carving in the Hopi and Zuni traditions of the Southwest. The mask's surface was painted with a mineral pigment in 2 colors, red and black, in a geometric pattern of triangles and stepped forms that the specialists described as formally consistent with Southwestern ceramic and textile design traditions, rather than California ones. It was not identical to any specific documented object, but it sat unmistakably within a design language that belongs to the Pueblos and desert peoples 400 miles to the east. How it arrived in a sealed cave inside a giant sequoia forest is a question that has produced considerable disagreement. What nobody disagrees about is that it is old, that it is carefully made, and that it was deliberately placed here by someone who understood what it meant. Number 11 was a tool that the archaeologists recognized immediately, but couldn't immediately reconcile with this location. It was a drill, a shaft straightener, a small flat stone about 3 inches long with a drilled hole through the center, just large enough to pass an arrow shaft, used to straighten wooden shafts by working the heated wood through the hole while applying lateral pressure. Shaft straighteners are documented across North America, a practical and widely distributed technology. But this one was made from steatite, soapstone, and the specific type of steatite, gray-green with a particular talc content, matched most closely to sources on the Channel Islands off the coast of Southern California, where the Chumash and their predecessors operated quarries and manufacturing sites for steatite objects that were distributed across a trade network reaching hundreds of miles inland. A Channel Islands steatite tool in the Sierra Nevada interior is not impossible. The Chumash trade network was real and documented. But placing a coastal steatite tool in a sealed cave alongside a southwestern mask and a Colorado River ceramic vessel begins to suggest that this cave was not a local storage site. It was a crossroads. Number 10 was a piece of worked bone, about 6 inches long, shaped from what the zoo archaeologist identified as the femur of a large ungulate, most likely elk. It had been split, hollowed, and smoothed, with one end carved into a fine point and the other end decorated with a series of parallel incised lines interrupted at regular intervals by short diagonal cuts, a pattern she described as similar to tally marks, but more deliberate, more evenly spaced, with a consistency that suggested they were recording something specific rather than just counting. 42 marks in total, arranged in 6 groups of 7. The number and grouping struck the mathematician on the team immediately, because a cycle of 42 days, 6 weeks of 7, does not correspond to any obvious astronomical cycle visible to the naked eye, but does appear in several indigenous calendrical traditions as a subunit of longer ceremonial cycles. Whether this object records a calendrical count, a ceremonial sequence, or something else entirely, it records something. Someone was measuring time, or something that behaved like time, and they considered the record important enough to seal away inside a granite mountain. Comment right now, and tell me what you think those 42 marks represent. I genuinely want to know. Number 9 was a pouch made of tanned hide, still partially intact, with a drawstring closure of twisted sinew. The hide itself was identified as deer, consistent with local fauna, and the tanning method appeared to be brain tanning, a technique used across North America. So far local. But the contents were not. The pouch contained 3 categories of material. First, a quantity of red ochre, iron oxide pigment, which is abundant in California and unremarkable. Second, a small quantity of turquoise, ground to a coarse powder, which does not occur naturally in California and is most closely associated with sources in New Mexico, Arizona, and Nevada. And third, 4 small carved stone beads, each about ½ an inch across, made from a dark green stone identified as serpentinite, which does occur in California, but which the geologist noted was not the local variety, matching instead a specific serpentinite deposit in the Coast Ranges near what is now Clear Lake, about 200 miles to the northwest, turquoise from the southwest, serpentinite from Northern California, ochre from wherever, a pouch that contains the chemistry of a continent. Number 8 was the object that most directly changed the team's understanding of who might have used this cave. It was a length of raw copper wire, about 14 inches long and roughly 1/8 of an inch in diameter, coiled loosely and placed on the same stone ledge as the pouch. Native copper, occurring naturally in metallic form that can be cold-hammered and drawn without smelting, exists in significant quantities in one major North American deposit, the Keweenaw Peninsula of Michigan. The same deposit described in my video about the Mississippi River Cave, and this copper wire matches isotopically to that deposit. From Lake Superior to the Sierra Nevada is roughly 2,000 miles. The copper was not smelted, not alloyed, not cast. It was drawn from a natural deposit, cold worked into wire, and carried or traded an almost incomprehensible distance to end up coiled on a stone shelf inside a sealed cave in California. The Hopewell culture, centered in the Ohio and Mississippi valleys roughly 2,000 years ago, distributed Lake Superior copper across much of North America through trade networks of staggering scale. A piece of their copper ending up in California is extraordinary evidence of how far those networks reached. Number 7 was the most recent object in the cave. The radiocarbon date, which came back at roughly 650 to 750 CE, is the youngest, though even that is nearly 14 centuries ago. It was a fire-making kit, consisting of a hearthboard and a spindle, made from dried woody plants consistent with local species, along with a small plug of dried tinder fungus and a carefully folded piece of what appeared to be prepared animal intestine, used as a waterproof wrapper for the tinder. The kit itself is unremarkable, the kind of practical object people have made and used and discarded everywhere on Earth. But it was the most recent thing placed in the cave, which means that for a period of possibly several centuries, this cave was visited periodically by people who were adding to its contents or visiting what was already there, or both. The fire kit suggests someone came prepared to stay for a while, to work by firelight, to spend time with whatever was in this place. The cave was not sealed once and forgotten. It was used, and then eventually it was sealed. And the last thing placed inside it, the most recent thing, was a tool for making light in darkness. Number 6 was a flat piece of granite, a slab about 12 inches square and 2 inches thick, that had been smoothed on one face and marked with a design that took 3 days of careful photography and enhancement to fully document. The design was painted, not carved, in a dark reddish-brown pigment that analysis identified as a mixture of hematite and some kind of organic binder, possibly animal fat. The image showed a large tree, unmistakably represented with a massive trunk and spreading canopy, and surrounding it at the base, arranged in a ring, were 20 small human figures, each facing the tree. 20 figures. 20 objects in the cave. The team's archaeologist said in her field notes that she did not want to conclude too quickly that the number was intentional, that it might be coincidence, that rock art is frequently misread. She wrote that 3 times over 3 days. On the 4th day, she stopped writing it, because the figures were too carefully spaced, too deliberately rendered, too clearly 20, and not 19 or 21. The tree is a sequoia. The people around it are there for a reason. This painting was a diagram of intent. Number 5 was an object the team called, in their internal notes, simply the mirror, because that is what it appeared to be. It was a flat disc of obsidian, about 4 inches in diameter, polished on one face to a degree of smoothness that produced a genuine reflection. Obsidian mirrors are documented in Mesoamerican contexts, most famously associated with Tezcatlipoca, the Aztec deity of the night sky, whose name translates roughly as smoking mirror. Tezcatlipoca's mirror was used for divination, for seeing things not visible to the naked eye. But the more immediate question for the team was not the cultural significance of obsidian mirrors. It was the material itself. This obsidian is not from California. Trace element analysis matched it to a source in central Mexico, specifically the obsidian deposits of the Trans-Mexican Volcanic Belt. California has obsidian sources, good ones, used for millennia. Whoever placed this mirror in the cave either came from Mexico, had direct access to Mexican trade goods, or received this object through a chain of exchange so long it crossed multiple cultural boundaries and thousands of miles. The reflection in its polished face, if you held it up today, would show you your own face. But the person who made it was seeing something else entirely. Number 4 was a set of painted river stones, 7 of them, each about the size of a fist, smooth and rounded, painted with different symbols in red and black pigment. The stones are of a type available in local Sierra Nevada streams and present no sourcing mystery. But the symbols on them do. The team documented each symbol carefully and circulated the images among specialists in indigenous North American art traditions. 6 of the 7 symbols had identifiable parallels in documented traditions. Geometric forms consistent with Great Basin rock art, a spiral form seen across the Southwest, a cross and circle that appears from the Pacific coast to the Great Plains. But the 7th stone carried a symbol that nobody on the team, or among the specialists they consulted, could comfortably place within a North American tradition. It was a compound glyph, a dot within a circle within a square, with short lines extending from each corner of the square. One researcher noted that it bears a structural resemblance to certain glyphs used in the Zapotec writing system of ancient Oaxaca. Another dismissed that comparison as speculative. Both responses are documented in the record. The stone sits in a collection box with 6 companions that all make sense, and one that doesn't. Yet. And that "not yet" is the most interesting word in the entire catalog. Number 3 was a container unlike anything else in the cave. It was made from a section of giant sequoia bark, about 8 inches long and 5 inches wide, curved naturally from the bark's shape, with the ends folded and pinched closed and sealed with a dark resinous material that the chemists identified as a mixture of pine pitch and an unidentified compound that does not match any local plant resin in their reference database. The container was intact and sealed when found. Inside it, when it was opened under laboratory conditions, was a quantity of fine black powder and 3 small, flat seeds. The powder has been analyzed and found to contain carbon, mineral particles, and trace organic compounds that suggest it was made by burning something that is no longer identifiable. The seeds are the more important finding. They have been identified as Nicotiana rustica, a species of tobacco, but not the same species found in the herb bundle from Object 13. Nicotiana rustica is the stronger, more alkaloid-rich tobacco associated with ceremonial and shamanic use across a vast range from South America to the northeastern United States. It was cultivated and traded by indigenous peoples for its potency. Finding its seeds in a sealed sequoia bark container on a granite ridge inside a national park is, depending on your framework, either evidence of a trade network, a pilgrimage, or something for which we still don't have a precise category. Number 2 was a painted hide, rolled tightly and wrapped in the same tool reed that had been used for the herb bundle. When unrolled, it measured approximately 20 by 30 inches, and its surface was covered in a painting executed with care and intent. The image was a map, or what the team's geographers believe is a map. It showed a mountain range in profile, recognizable in its rough proportions as the Sierra Nevada, with a large tree at its center, unmistakably a sequoia by its silhouette. To the west of the range, the painted surface showed a flat expanse ending in a wavy line that the team read as the ocean. To the east, the painted surface showed a network of paths or trails, represented by dotted lines, that connected the mountain to several other points marked with small symbols. The symbols at those other points did not match local California traditions. The geographers spent 2 weeks attempting to reconcile the proportions and directions of those dotted trails with known geographic features of the western half of North America. Their conclusion, offered with significant caveats, was that the network of paths on this hide, if it represents real geography at approximately the scale suggested by the Sierra Nevada profile, would connect this mountain to the Colorado River corridor, to the Great Basin, to the coast near what is now Santa Barbara, and to a point to the north whose position corresponds roughly to the Willamette Valley of Oregon. The map, if it is a map, describes a world. And this cave, if it is what the map suggests, was the center of it. And now we reach number 1. This is the object that the lead archaeologist described, in her personal journal that she later shared voluntarily with the team, as the thing she will carry for the rest of her life. It was at the back of the chamber, in the deepest shadow, set into a small natural recess in the granite that had been enlarged slightly by deliberate pecking, the tool mark still visible. It was wrapped in multiple layers of material. The outermost layer was a fitted piece of tanned elk hide, supple and well-preserved, tied with sinew cord. Beneath that was a woven layer of fine basketry in a coiled technique so accomplished that the conservator who unwrapped it said it was the finest pre-Columbian basket weaving she had examined in 30 years of work, the coils so tight and even they resembled cloth. Beneath that was a layer of dried pine resin, applied in multiple thin coats and hardened into a shell. And beneath all of that, when the conservators finally reached it after 3 days of patient, documented work, was a human skull. A single skull, cleaned of all tissue and prepared with great deliberate care, its interior packed with a mixture of the same black powder found in the sequoia bark container and a quantity of small red seeds that have not yet been fully identified. The skull had been painted. The entire outer surface, cranium and mandible, was covered in a layer of red ochre applied over the bone, and on the frontal bone, in black pigment, a design had been carefully executed. The design was the same tree from the granite slab painting number 6, a massive trunk and spreading canopy. And surrounding it, arranged in a ring around the base of the tree, were 20 small figures. The same design. The same 20. The skull is that of an adult. Sex undetermined. No trauma. No pathology visible. Dental wear consistent with a fibrous diet. The radiocarbon date for the skull places it at approximately 900 to 1000 CE, which is not the oldest object in this cave, but is consistent with the period when the cave was most actively used. This skull was placed last or nearly last in the sequence, It was the heart of the cache, the thing everything else was arranged around and brought to and wrapped and sealed against the mountain. The lead archaeologist sat with it in the lab for a long time before she wrote anything in her journal. When she did write, she wrote 3 sentences. She wrote, "Someone loved this person. Someone carried them here from wherever they came from. And someone wanted them kept." Here is what the giant forest cave tells us, taken all at once. It tells us about a mountain that was not isolated, that was instead connected by documented and undocumented trails to the coast, the desert, the river valleys, the plateau. It tells us about a cave that was visited over centuries, that accumulated objects from across the western half of a continent, that was finally sealed and left. It tells us that the peoples who used this place were in conversation with peoples very far away, trading, traveling, exchanging objects that were too precious to be practical and too carefully handled to be casual. And it tells us that at the center of all of it was a person, unnamed, unknown, carried to a cave inside a sequoia forest and kept there, decorated with the same image that decorated the cave's own walls, surrounded by objects that came from everywhere. The mainstream story of pre-Columbian California is a story of isolated regional cultures. The giant forest cave is a story of something far more interconnected than that, far more intentional, far more carefully preserved. The next time someone tells you that the peoples of this continent lived in separate, self-contained worlds, think about the cotton cordage at 6,000 feet, the Mexican obsidian mirror, the Lake Superior copper wire, the skull painted with a sequoia tree, and 20 figures standing at its roots. Drop a comment right now and tell me which of these 20 objects you think is the most significant, and tell me what you think the cave was for. The answer matters. Share this with someone who thinks American history started in 1492, and I will see you in the next one.